What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. Alright, so before I get into this video, I want to give a big shout out to the man, the myth, the legend, the brother Robert Mason, coming through with the donation to the channel once again via the PayPal. Much respect to one of the MVPs of this channel. Truly appreciate him. Truly appreciate the love and passion he has for the game and some of the great comments that he writes and some of his comments and some of the donations. So salute to you. So this is one of the comparisons that I was asked to make as far as two great players, and that is David Robinson and Hakeem Olajuwon. And at one point in time, I would say definitely in the mid-90s, if there was a such thing as the internet back then, I think they would have dominated the discussion groups as far as who was better. This was a legitimate conversation around 1994 and 1995. Who was the better big man, David Robinson or Hakeem Olajuwon? Because the consensus was that David would probably eventually win a title. His teams just weren't good enough yet. And Olajuwon was at his peak at that time. So who I think was the best? Well, I'm just going to say, just from watching both of them play, looking at their careers, I have to give the nod to Olajuwon. I think most of us would give the nod to Olajuwon. But that's not to say that David Robinson was not a great player. As a matter of fact, you can make a strong argument that David Robinson is quickly becoming one of the more underrated players in the history of the NBA. Because as time has gone on, and the people who have watched David Robinson, remember him in the 80s and early 90s, are not as loud or as boisterous in the blogosphere. There's people that only really remember Tim Duncan. They're forgetting about how great David Robinson once was. David Robinson, I'm going to tell you something. When I think of the greatest athletes to ever play at that position, honestly, I think of Wilt Chamberlain and David Robinson. That's my short list as far as the greatest athletes to ever play at center. Look at young David Robinson. Look at him from 1989 to 1994. Look at the... Excuse me, I got the hiccups. Look at young David Robinson when he runs the floor. Look at him blocking shots, moving on the floor, on the court. You didn't see a center move like that back then. And that's another point I was trying to make. I was talking about the 90s and 2000s. You've heard me say that in the 90s and the 2000s, one of the reasons why field goal percentages were starting to drop was partly because of the athleticism of some of these big men. We weren't, I'm talking about we, but in that era, players weren't shooting quite as many threes. Everything wasn't pushed out to the perimeter. So you still had a lot of mid-range game and, guys trying to take it to the basket, a lot of guys trying to score near the goal. And it can be difficult scoring in the post because you got your back to the basket. Yeah, you're technically closer to the rim, but you got these big motherfuckers that's trying to prevent that. Imagine trying to imagine you're a guy. First of all, imagine if you're in the post and you're Dennis Rodman size. You're 6'8", 225, 230. But you're trying to score on someone who's 6'10", 270, 280, muscle, or someone 7'2" with a 8-foot reach. It's not that easy. You know what I'm saying? It's not easy at all. Ask Andre Drummond. Ask Ben Simmons. Ask Rudy Gobert, who's 7'2". It's not as easy to score in the post as you might think it is. So these guys should get a lot more respect for the athletes and the great players that they are. And but anyway, that era had a lot of great athletic bigs that were taking over for some of these other bigs who were big and good players, but they weren't necessarily athletes. So anyway, going back to these two, David Robinson to me arguably had the edge when it comes to numbers and stats, especially peak for peak. You know, David Robinson's PER for his career is like 26.2, and Olajuwon's was like his PER rate was 23.6. You know, and when you look at Olajuwon's peak, which to me is 85 to 96, so he had a very long peak, in my opinion. You can make the argument his peak was, I would go 84, 85 to 96. During that time period, he averaged 24.3 points, 12.2 rebounds, 2.7 assists, 1.9 steals, 3.5 blocks per game, 51.6% shooting from the floor, and 71.1% from the charity stripe. Dave Robinson's peak to me was 1989 to 1996. So his numbers were 25.6 points, 11.8 rebounds, 3.1 assists, 1.7 steals, 3.6 blocks, 52.6% shooting from the floor, 26% from three-point range, which was great for a big man back then. That's indicative of Robinson having a really good range for a big man back then, and 74.7%. So he had the edge in scoring, big edge in block and assists, pretty much a wash in steals, little slight edge in block, but about a wash. Slightly higher field goal percentage, better range, and a little bit better free throw shooter. So the numbers are a little bit in Robinson's favor, but prime Robinson, the offense always ran around him, right? Whereas with Hakeem, I'd say, what was it, 90 and 92, those 2 years, I think those were Don Chaney years, the offense was running through the backcourt. So it hurt some of his scoring numbers, some of his offensive numbers a little bit. Let's see. When it comes to, just looking at some of these numbers, some of these league leading things here. Hakeem Olajuwon led the league in rebounding twice, 89 and 90. Led the league in blocks 3 times, 90, 91, and 93. David Robinson led the league in rebounding once, 91. Led the league in blocks once in 92 with 4.5 blocks per game. Amazing. And led the league in scoring in 94, 29.8 points per game. The year that, he had the 71-point game in the final game of the regular season. I think an area where King has a big edge against David Robinson is playoffs. When you look at the playoffs, David Robinson overall averaged 18.1 points, 10.6 rebounds, 2.3 assists, 1.2 steals, 2.5 blocks on 47.9% shooting from the floor and 70.8% from the charity stripe. But we all have to remember, because David Robinson later on in his career especially played on better teams with the Tim Duncan championship teams, that skewed his numbers a bit. So you look at David Robinson from 1990 to 1996, his best years in the postseason. It's 24 points a game, 11.8 rebounds, 2.9 assists, 1.3 steals, 3.1 blocks on 48.8% shooting overall, and 72.8% for the charity stripe. Hakeem Olajuwon, on the other hand, for his playoff career, 25.9 points per game, 11.2 rebounds, 3.2 assists, 1.7 steals, 3.3 blocks, 52.8% shooting from the floor, and 71.9% from the charity stripe. So one thing about Robinson compared to Hakeem really raised his level of play when it mattered the most. His best years in the postseason, 86 to 95. During that stretch, unbelievable 28.6 points, 11.8 rebounds, 3.4 assists, 1.7 steals, 3.7 blocks, 53.3% shooting from the floor, 31% from three-point range, and 72.9% from the charity stripe. Dave Robinson in the postseason. Let's see if he had any league-leading years. Well, in 91, in 4 games, he led the playoffs in field goal percentage, 68.6% shooting. That same year, he led the playoffs in rebounds per game, Dave Robinson, 13.5, and blocks, 3.8. And in 97, 98, David Robinson led the playoffs in rebounds per game, 14.1, and 3.3 blocks per game. Hakeem Olajuwon is all over the place. 86 led in games played in the playoffs, or tied at least, with 20 games. 87 led the playoffs in block shots, 4.3 a game. And 88 led the playoffs in scoring with 37.5 points and 16.8 rebounds. 89 led the playoffs in rebound, 13 a game. And 90 led the playoffs in blocks in a 4-game series, averaging a ridiculous 5.8 blocks per game. 93 led the playoffs in blocks, 4.9. 94 in scoring, 28.9. 95 in playoffs, 33 points per game. Now let's just go through different things. Scoring. Dave Robinson, to me, oh man, Olajuwon had the advantage, obviously, in post scoring. I mean, he and Kevin McHale are probably the 2 greatest post scorers the game has ever seen. Right. Jump shooting. Dave Robinson he developed into a really good jump shooter, as is the case with Hakeem Olajuwon. Both of them had great range, but I think Olajuwon gets the edge as far as being a better post scorer. Obviously, a huge edge. Robinson may have been an even better mid-range shooter than Olajuwon, but Olajuwon he developed a good mid-range and shot out to 17, 18 feet. But Robinson, his range was very noteworthy. He was like one of those guys, Robinson, I would say, that was consistently hitting jumpers out to 17, 18 feet when we weren't seeing that back then. Him and Patrick Ewing. So I give a slight edge in jump shooting to Dave Robinson. Robinson was a slightly better free throw shooter. Shot blocking, you gotta give it to Hakeem Olajuwon. He's the all-time official leader in block shots. Rebounding, slight edge to Olajuwon. Leadership, Olajuwon. Clutch performance, Olajuwon by a large margin. Playmaking, that wasn't something that was big that you would see in centers back then, but I recall Dave Robinson being a little bit better, although King got better at that. Dave Robinson was a little bit better at playmaking, I think, than Olajuwon. But like I said, Olajuwon did get better in that as his career progressed. Athleticism, Dave Robinson. Strength, Dave Robinson. Defense, Hakeem Olajuwon, if I haven't said it already. Let's go on shot blocking. That's pretty much it, man. And then I think another factor you got to look at is, even though they're both 2-time champions, Hakeem Olajuwon was the best player on his team those 2 times that they won the championships. Whereas Dave Robinson was not the best player on those 2 championship teams that he was on. Tim Duncan was the best player. And in the year that David Robinson won MVP, he was humiliated by Hakeem Olajuwon in the Western Conference Finals. Whereas the year that Olajuwon was MVP, I believe that was 1994, we know what he did that year. So overall, man, having watched both of them, I think anybody that watched both of them and you're not being swayed by numbers, you got to give the nod to Olajuwon. You know, even though I know the advanced stats go toward David Robinson, some of that had to do with him being on a better team. Some of it. And then some of it had to do, I think, with his earlier role on those teams. And you got to look at the stylistics of the teams that he were on at times. You know what I'm saying? David Robinson. But anyway, that's just my opinion, man. Tell me what you guys think.